podcast. It's a window to the past of history, ancestry, and genealogy, not a story. No, no, no. We're 80% African and 20% other.
Now, as I researched further, it is to determine if there was more than 70 bodies, or the land mass could have been 100 acres times 70 burial, sites. Now, if we look at a darker systemic history involving the Allodial Gardens Ninth Ward area, one that intersects with modern industrial waste, the toxic donut, and the literal desecration of indigenous and perhaps more recent remains. While official archaeological reports, like those from Jackson in year 2014 and Hetman in year 2009, they focus on these 70 plus prehistorical burial sites recovered during the highway salvage. There is a separate, harrowing narrative involving the landfills and dump sites surrounding Allodial Gardens. Oh, let's go. Now, the burning dump site and the Bishop Ford. For decades, the area south of the Bishop Ford was used as a dumping ground for the city's industrial and residential waste. The 130 street landfills located or the locations like the CID landfill and the Paxton landfills surrounded the Ninth Ward. Records from environmental activists, notably Hazel Johnson, deemed the mother of environmental justice, describes constant fires at these sites. The disturbance of mounds. Residents and local historians have long maintained that when the Bishop Ford was expanded and the burrow pits like Wampum Lake were dug, the machinery tore through vastly more than 70 bodies that they definitely know of. There we have systemic erasure, because this was the Ninth Ward in Allodial Gardens. The protection of these sites were often ignored. There are accounts of cremains and skeletal fragments being churned up by industrial equipment and processed or burned along with the urban refuse for over half a century. And I smelled that long. So can you imagine those that smelt it and they lived there all those years? Because there's blacks that lived there. Because they were traveling back and forth to their parents and family members worked at the steel mills in Indiana, and what is that? The East Illinois, right there. Let's get into the frequency. Remember I told you about the frequency. I'm gonna blow your mind with this. Now, the frequency and energy of the land. I brought up the Cahokia frequency because I wanted to know what the connection was between the mounds and the culture of the tribes on that trail in that Calumet area. And let me keep this in mind. When you go over there to Avenue O, those are the biggest races over there back in the 70s. And how do you get those type of people, right? Because those are they create sundown towns. Those sundown towns are created to keep certain people from coming back to land masses that they took from them or tricked from them. So they need the worst people, the meanest people, the most evilest people, the people that can take your life and don't care nothing about it, laugh about it, talk about it, smile about it afterwards, and then do not serve no time. That's how your sundown towns are created, so that the Indian could not go back to his land and take the land. We're not talking about Native Americans. We're talking about Indians that kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting and did not mind dying for the land. So we're going to get into the frequency and energy of the land. The Cahokia frequency. Now, in indigenous belief systems, the disturbance and burning of ancestors is seen as a profound rupture of the land's energy. Now, how would they know that if the bodies are burned? That's why we don't do cremation, people. We're not supposed to do cremation. Is innate. So in order for them to burn through these mounds, this land, it comes from the logistics, right? What are your Indian beliefs? Those agency or those agents or the agency system agents, they learned it from the Amerindians of all those tribes. So when they report that back and they have to, then they come and they buy land, they have to discuss with the government agencies like the Indian Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Department of Transportation. They have to discuss these grounds every time. And they found out that the disturbance and burning of ancestors, indigenous ancestors, is seen as profound rupture of the land's energy. Remember, this is about frequency and energy of the land. So to pave over those mounds, to pave over the burial sites, to pave over the entire cultures, to take over the bodies, to use the body as medical research every time someone enters a medical or doctor's program. It ruptures the land's energy. What are we connected to? The land. Right? We're connected to the land. So that frequency has been broken. Let's get into the spiritual stagnation when the rupture of the land's energy takes place. Many believe that the toxic nature of the Ninth Ward, talking about in Chicago, isn't just chemical, but spiritual, caused by the uninterrupted burning and paving over of sacred mounds, centers, and burial sites. A lot of things take place over there, 127 in Cahokia. That's hard living. The expressway, driving, it's like driving on a plate of ice and oil at the same time. Ice, oil, sleet, and rain at the same time, making the environmental conditions toxic. Let's get into the 70-year timeline. Now, from the construction of Allodial in the 40s through the expressway booms of the 50s and 60s and the landfill operations that lasted into the 2000s, the land was essentially treated as a sacrifice zone. All right, people. How do you know this? You're just saying something to be saying it. I've already gave you citations. I gave you deep research or deep dive research peer reviews. I gave you names and dates. I gave you titles. I gave you departments. I gave you years to research. You want more? Let's go to research and community accounts confirming decades-long history of environmental racism and spiritual displacement in the Ninth Ward and Allodial Gardens, where industrial expansion literally paved over and burned the area's indigenous and historical legacy. Now, we get into this. Those that's in Allodial Gardens, we know that it's very difficult to move there, which means that is generations of who? Ancestors, descendants of the ancestors that originally moved there in that land that went to war during World War I and II, came back and was promised land that probably was taken from them, but nonetheless it was promised to the black, quote unquote black, military vets. It is difficult to get in Allodial Gardens, which means if we think about it, they're the descendants of generations that have lived there that are not only now spiritually connected via the generations of living there, but also the Amerindians that were promised housing after the land was taken. Brown Indians, dark-skinned Indians. If you keep having in your ideology that the phenotype of the Amerindian is the modern-day Native American, the Siberian-looking or the Mexican-looking, you are sadly mistaken. That's the purpose of this paper genocide research, is to point out the dark-skinned individuals that lost their way into paper genocide. The eyewitnesses, the eyewitness accounts states and calls what they experienced the toxic donut. Now, Allodial Garden residents led by Mother of Environmental Justice named Hazel Johnson, she documented the systematic transformation of her neighborhood into a sacrifice zone. Here's what she stated: that there was illegal dumping stakeouts where residents conducted midnight stakeouts to record license plates of trucks dumping rubble and unidentified waste in vacant lots under the cover of darkness. That means different cities came in, different neighborhoods brought their trash. Indiana, people brought their trash. Different states and other counties came into that area and dropped their trash. Which means that Chicago and Illinois rented out that area knowing that it was burial mounds and used it as a dumping ground from those outside the area. So the residents did what? They used stakeouts. They was up at midnight recording license plates. Then we have the memorial wall. It's a physical wall in Allodial Gardens, which lists the names of hundreds of residents who died prematurely from cancer and respiratory illnesses, which is a direct result of the 50 documented landfills and 250 leaking storage tanks surrounding them. Another eyewitness, which is the discovery of biological waste. Residents have reported finding horrifying items in local lagoons, including formaldehyde preserved baby sharks and pigs used for medical classes, dumped and left to rot alongside industrial chemicals. Now, it's information going around that babies, infants, newborn babies, look just like pigs. Skin is the same. But the residents have reported finding this in their local lagoons. Then we have the 70 years of burning the incinerator legacy. And for those of you who do not know what an incinerator is, I'll tell you from growing up in the projects. An incinerator is where in the projects on each floor there was a metal chute that you open, and it was like a V when it opens, meaning the door is flat against the wall. You pull a little steel handle, the steel door opens. It's like probably like a manila envelope or the accordion envelope, V shape once it's open, and you throw your garbage down there. You can have a big bag, but if you pour it in there, it will go down that, what we call the chute. At the bottom of the chute, oftentimes fire would be going up. I don't know how high the fire was, but it definitely was always burning. So literally, we could take garbage out to the metal dumpster, or we can put it in the incinerator. Alright? So, 70 years of burning, which is called the incinerator legacy. Let's get into this. Now, the burning you and I are talking about is actually anchored in both industrial history and the destruction of the land's original inhabitants. So what it's saying is this is what they use. Incinerator habits. Constantly burning something. We thought it was what? Constantly flooding. Everywhere there's a mound, there's usually a arcade center. Fun zones that they put up. Golf courses. Fires. Alright? Once again, the burning is anchored in both industrial history and the destruction of the land's original inhabitants. We have the mobile and PCB incinerators. Now, for years, the Paxton Lagoons, the lagoon is a body of water. I'm not sure if they're man-made or not, but for years, the Paxton Lagoons featured a mobile incinerator that burned unidentified toxic fluff. A nearby PCB incinerator also operated for decades, frequently suffering explosions, and the incinerators in the projects always exploded and releasing acid clouds over the neighborhood. What did I tell you about that? So let me go to the explosions in the projects. Now, where did the explosions come from? Oh, aerosol can, glass, whatever is, exploding or collapsing under the heat. Remember I told you about that how the ground feel when you're driving. It feels like a plate of ice and grease all at the same time. Sleet, snow. And I told you that it's as if something from the sky fell down onto that. Well, here they're describing it as releasing acid clouds over the neighborhood. And that's exactly what happened. I lived a mile from there when I bought my first house. So those smells were there then, and that was in 2002. You wake up smelling it. You go to bed smelling it. You go to the store. You leave out the door. the stench came all the way to the house, in the house. You didn't have to be outside. And it smelled like humans. All right? The 1950s Bower Pit destruction. Now, during the construction of the Bishop Ford Expressway, remember massive excavators tore through the Hoxie Farm fortified village, while 70 barrels were professionally recovered. Countless others were likely churned into the field used to build the highway embankments. Now, the burning of remains, official archaeological reports. Archaeological reports. How many times you want me to say it? I'm going to say it again. Official archaeological reports from the 1950s explicitly document that there were 16 fire pits containing ash and carbonized material. Forensic analysis of skeletal remains showed signs of high-tempered burning, reflecting a history of violence again and ritual that was eventually covered by a 20th century industrial ash. Now, they keep trying to cover up. If these reports from the 50s say that, and you still had bodies burning from the 1950s all the way up until 2004, 2003, were they the violence and rituals of that tribe? If you've been burning the remains and artifacts this long, are you trying to tell me that there's something still burning and you're still determining it to this day that they're from the ancient civilization and that the remains that are charred are from violence and rituals? Oh, okay. So the companies are burning them today. And then from those ashes, you're determined. Okay. Let's go to the Cahokia, Chicago connection. The Bishop Ford sits on a former sewage farm and industrial waste dump, built over ancient trails, Trails. I told you to come say use those trails. What is that? Forest preserves have nothing but Indian trails. They walk through them, drove through the Indians. Rode horses through it, canoes up and down the rivers. So connecting the Cahokia Chicago connection. In the eyes of many environmental justice advocates, remember that toxic donut? It's a modern manifestation of the spiritual rupture caused by the uninterrupted burning and desecration of these mounds for over 70 years. How do we repair that? I know for a fact that TikTok is doing a thing, because when you're all talking the same thing and you're connecting, and we're connecting, and people on YouTube connecting, we're raising a totally different frequency because the dry bones are waking up. The dry bones aren't necessarily those that have been buried, but the dry bones are the DNA that attaches to those that are in those burial sites, giving you deja vu, giving you your intuition, your discernment, your innate knowledge of the indigenous culture that you're supposed to be protecting today. That's why the frequency is changing, and if they can't do anything about it, the reason why they want to end and control the narratives on social media. Now they got the local news on down pat. They control the narrative there. Those that turn on local news, go to Facebook, are receiving 1% of what we know on TikTok and YouTube. And that's why they want to control the narrative. So we have all those other countries that knows what's being said. While they already know the truth as well about the Amerindians and who we are, that raises the frequency, a frequency that people that don't have souls can't do nothing about.